Good evening, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to attend our presentation. My name is Gerry Vece, and I am the chairman of the Mortgage Building Committee. We are an 8-member committee. Here this evening are David Townsend, Jeff Stevens, Pete Nye, John Giannotti, Sally Heffernan, Dennis Donovan, and Peggy Sullivan could not be here this evening. Our purpose this evening is to provide information to the public on our proposal to construct a new Morgan school. Our hope is that when you leave this evening, you will have the information you need to cast an informed vote at referendum on Wednesday, April 11th. The committee was charged by the Board of Selectmen 2 years ago to address the need for a new roof over the existing Morgan school. The roof was due to be replaced in the summer of 2011 at an estimated cost of $4 million. Recognizing the need to also renovate parts of the building, the committee requested funds from the town to conduct a facility study. The committee then began the task of selecting a construction management company to study and assess the existing Morgan school for potential renovation or replacement. We advertised a written request for qualifications and received 5 responses. We interviewed 3 finalists and chose Gilbane Corporation. The report was completed, and this committee presented its findings to the town in February of 2011. The recommendation at that time, after thoroughly considering all options, was to replace the existing building with a new facility. After receiving approval from the Board of Selectmen, the Board of Finance, and overwhelming support at the town meeting, David Thompson Architects was hired to complete a conceptual design. David's work was delayed because an agreement to purchase a new site for the school was still being negotiated. The Richards family were reluctant to sell their property to the town, as it was an integral part of their business. With the help of Bill Delcher, a realtor, who volunteered his time to assist with the negotiations, an agreement was reached. If passed at referendum, the town will pay the appraised value for the land, which is $2 million. In addition, $1.7 million will pay for the relocation of the 70 structures on the site, which includes cement foundations, steel framing, and irrigation. We remain convinced that the findings of the Gilbane report are still valid. Current, up-to-date estimates put the cost of renovating as new the old building at $60,778,000. Over the last 25 years, we have spent more than $10 million on capital improvements, and it is anticipated that we would have to spend many more millions over the next 20 years if the renovation option had been chosen. The educational and financial benefits of building new on a new site far outweigh the renovation option. Here this evening are Jack Cross, Superintendent of Schools, Mary Ann O'Donnell, Assistant Superintendent, Carrie Hagnes, Principal of the Morgan School, Nate Jacobson, Assistant Principal, David Thompson and Stephanie Dagan Monroe from David Thompson Architects. Robert Lynn from Gilbane is here to answer questions about the cost estimate. Kevin Kane, Clinton's Director of Finance, is here to answer questions about bonding and tax implications. William Fritz, our first selectman, will be here pretty soon, will address the economic benefits that commercial development on the current Morgan site could generate for the town. Our last speaker will be Building Committee member Pete Nye. We will then address questions from the audience. At this point, I would like to introduce David Thompson of David Thompson Architects. Thank you.
start things off with a little bit of an apology. I see a number of familiar faces from the other night when we gave our presentation, and one of the things that we consider important in this process is making certain that our message is consistent. That means I'm going to repeat everything that I said from a week and a half ago or so. So some of you will bear with me while we go over this, but that is an important concept to keep in mind, that we want to inform everybody in the same manner, regardless of their sentiments about the project, and be consistent about all of them. So let's see. We began the process some time ago, as you all know, and been working on it for quite some time. And our role as the architects has been primarily as planners and to oversee initially the master planning process, which we worked with Gail Bain on. And then ultimately we're engaged to do the concept design plan that you see now. And that whole effort was really designed to have an understanding of how this building would be conceived and would be structured on the site. And it's gone through a process which has led us to the design that you see on the images here and that you will see in the presentation that follows. One thing I'd like to emphasize, however, is that the design that you're looking at here is really not the subject of the referendum vote that's upcoming. There's really a set of very narrow variables that you're being asked to make a judgment upon. It's primarily about the $64.7 million project cost, and it's the 135,000 square feet that the proposed new building will be, in contrast to the 158 or so thousand square feet that the existing building is. So our job tonight is to convince you, or at least show you, what a 135,000 square foot building looks like relative to the school that's here today, and what that means in terms of lost square footage, how it impacts the ability for your school to function, and in fact, how your school, in our judgment, can really function much better. So, a number of things that we'll be showing you. Again, I'll emphasize a number of times where we get to points where we're talking about specific aspects of the design that may turn out differently. Again, a point about the process. Our engagement is strictly for this concept design and planning phase. When the referendum is complete, if the vote were to be positive, then they go through a whole architect selection process to identify who the architectural team is will actually be designing the building. And we, no doubt, have a considerable interest in that. We'll throw our hat in that ring and hope that we are candidates. And if so, then it's possible that the design of the school will evolve in much the direction that you're seeing here, although I'm sure it will change in many ways. But it's also possible that another firm would be selected, in which case, obviously, would look quite different. There are certain principles that the building committee has shared with us, and the town has shared with us, that I think are sort of in the DNA of the idea of the school at this point, and it's likely that they would find their way to the final solution. But fundamentally, it's about size and dollars. And we just want to be able to convince you all that at the new site, at this square footage, it could really turn out to be a wonderful benefit to the town. So let's start with just a reminder about the existing school, which you obviously are quite familiar with and are sitting in as we speak. The existing site, I heard a number of comments being made earlier in the tours about some of the deficiencies of the site. We're all experiencing them every day. The most significant, of course, is that this is a school that was conceived 30, 40, 50 years ago or so over time at this particular location, serving a smaller population. The original core of the building was located relatively close to the road. The expansion that's occurred over time has surrounded all of that in such a way that you're now very close to Billingworth Turnpike. And that is just a fundamental hindrance on the proper functioning of the site, on the safety of the site, on one's access in and around it. And so that we struggle with every day in terms of the implications of traffic and safety considerations. Another deficiency is a buildable area. And there are, of course, one could, in a general sense, say that there are three options on the table. One would be to renovate the existing building as new. Another, which I'm showing tonight, is build a new building at a different site. And of course, a third would be to build a new building on the same site. Now, because of the constraints of the buildable area, the overwhelming likelihood is that new school would have to be built in this area, and with this left in operation, and then ultimately the existing school taken down and that space turned over to play fields. And just the particular geometry of the site and the ways in which one comes and goes and gains access to it, those are really profound limitations on the efficiency with which we can do that. So that option, although it is one that we certainly entertained and effectively is still on the table, one might suppose, again, hopefully by the end of this evening, you'll see the wisdom, and at least with regard to a new school, being But lastly, probably in an ironic way, one of the great deficiencies of this site is the fact that it's so great for other uses. Obviously, the development of Clinton Crossing has demonstrated how valuable this property is for retail use, and it's not well utilized for high school for all the reasons I just mentioned. But then, in addition to the fact that were it for the high school to leave and if turned over for retail purposes, that would be a far more economically beneficial use for the town of Clinton. The school itself, as I mentioned, as again you're all familiar with, has been an accretion of additions over many decades. Each one was really done just in response to the one done previously. And the register seems to like to quote me as saying it's just an agglomeration of additions, and indeed that's really all it is. There's very little order or logic to the internal organization of the building at this point. And the school staff struggles with that in many ways in the course of the day. One thing, of course, of great significance is that in order to ensure that there's natural light to all the classrooms, it's resulted in the development of these courtyard spaces and an enormous amount of perimeter wall area, which is very inefficient to heat and to maintain. Again, I'm going to get into significant detail on how that works to your detriment here in terms of the long-term operation of the school. But a fundamental feature of this, one-story building, very big footprint, lots of perimeter area, a very extensive roof area. The lower level, there's nothing inherent about a multi-level scheme that should suggest that it isn't well integrated educationally, but in this case, it's not working well for you. Most of the shop spaces tend to be at this lower level. There's very little architectural connection between the two. The school staff has pointed out frequently how there's almost a kind of ghettoizing of those who are involved in the shop activities, less for what they do and more for just the geography of things, the fact that they're down in space. And then, of course, these sort of scattering support spaces, some athletic functions occurring on the opposite side, disconnected entirely. So, but back to the first floor plan again, really the most important thing I would like to emphasize to you tonight is this, I'll call it even gargantuan square footage devoted to a school of 600 students, in fact less than that now. The enrollment figure that we use is 601. That resulted from a study done by the superintendent's office based on demographic projections over an 8-year period. And however, if we're the state to look at this school, take the total square footage which is devoted to educational functions, excluding any maintenance areas, the calculation that they would use on a square foot basis would tell you that it's a school for 860 kids. Now, that's borne out by the fact that if you look at the numbers on the lockers, they go up to 900 and beyond. So for whatever reason, this is a school that over time grew to be the size that it is today, which by almost any measure is way bigger than is needed for 600 students. And there's significant downsides to that in obvious ways in terms of operating costs, maintenance costs, and especially just in terms of the development of the school culture. So I won't dwell any further on the existing school. Let's talk about the new possibilities. Again, by now, I trust you're all familiar with the potential new site. We're on Killingworth Turnpike, about a quarter mile. This drawing north is to your left. And the site of the Clinton nurseries, which is bisected by the Indian River that you see here. So a portion of it occurs on the west with terrific access to Killingworth Turnpike. A portion of it, roughly a little bit less than half of it, occurs to the east, which would be a good candidate for the athletic facilities. So starting with vehicular access, there's a broad street frontage here that makes it possible to enter in multiple locations. I should point out right at the outset that at present there is a private residence that exists right here. And in fact, the property for which the auction exists, the purchase services for the town, is everything that you see outlined here, save a little rectangle. In fact, it's not overlapping the building. It's right about here. Okay, so at present there is no agreement to purchase that land or property. There are negotiations going on about that, and I will say that when we developed the site plan for the school, we didn't go into it with any particular agenda with regard to that property, but it just so turned out that looking at the logical place to put the building, it doesn't actually sit on any aspect of that property. So I don't want to suggest for a moment that it's a good idea to buy this property and not acquiring the residential property. I would describe that as a lose-lose situation for both the town and the property owner. We would get a somewhat compromised site. The property owner would be surrounded on 3 sides by a public school, And in that scenario, the town, of course, over time, should let that property change hands over time. There may be an opportunity to acquire it in such a way that it would not make sense to pay exorbitantly for the purchase of that today. Again, not a good situation. I really just highlight the fact that it is not utterly critical to move forward. So we have three vehicular entrances off the Cornwall Turnpike. The primary one being in the center of the site, which gives access to a vehicular loop. On the south, gives access to the major parking area. To the north, the building is located. We have more detail on that momentarily. There is a secondary entrance at the northern end of the site, which provides a place for essentially the public access to athletic facilities, gymnasium. Again, you see the plan to understand how that works. Essentially, the gym is down at this end. So it has effectively its own vehicular entrance, its own satellite parking lot, its own drop-off area, and various provisions for handicap accessibility. The service entrance exists around on the east side back here, so service vehicles are coming to the site back into the loading dock area here, concealed from public views, things like dumpsters, trash, things in general. Activity associated with service entrances is not seen out in the public. The site obviously develops down further in this direction. There's a third entrance down at this end, which will provide a means for students and faculty to come and go independent of the kind of activity that could be occurring here. But the site is completely ringed with vehicular pathways so that they'll be able to get around it appropriately. And then finally, on the opposite side of the river is the area devoted to the playfields. Now, I also would like to note that on the existing site, one of the deficiencies you've all been working with for many years is the fact that the Peters complex, recreational complex, is remote from the school, and so football games and other major outdoor athletic activities are occurring far distance. So one of the really extraordinary opportunities that this site provides for us, unique to this site, is the fact that you see the corner right at the top here. That is the corner of Peters Field. So we have direct pedestrian access without having to involve any motor vehicles at all from the school to that site. At present, there's what we might describe as a land bridge that reaches the river at this location. It's got a large diameter culvert. This would be rebuilt, and we wouldn't propose anything so elaborate as a new bridge. It can be structured in such a way as to allow for emergency vehicles to get access to the playfields. We would see it limited for that purpose. Most of the vehicular activity can occur on this side of the site, but one could have bollards, movable bollards off curb, some manner to get across here for emergency response to the event that occurred on the field portion of it. The area, and this remains to be confirmed with the number of specific site limitations. We have an understanding of some of the wetland setbacks and other limitations, contours, soil conditions. Much more detail needs to be developed in that. But we have a pretty good feeling that we can support two soccer/lacrosse fields, a baseball diamond, separate softball diamonds, 6 tennis courts, and a football practice field, which has goalposts at either end, here and here, and overlapping with the outfields of the baseball and softball fields, since they are seasonal activities that are able to do so. So a number of really positive things. So I guess the overarching statement I can make about this, we rarely encounter a site that receives many amenities that has these kinds of potentials, particularly in such close proximity to an existing important aspect of your program. An environmental study was done, revealed nothing of any particular concern at this time. That would have to be developed further. There was a so-called phase 1 study, so that the historical documentation on the site suggests to us, and some other investigative work has indicated that, although it has been a nursery for many years, and there are a variety of chemicals that are used associated with that, none of them are terribly egregious or difficult to deal with, known at this time. So we're optimistic about that. So I'm going to start with a final image here. I usually go in this sequence, but I want to sort of put something out to get a sense of our thought about how this building would fit into a residential neighborhood, and particularly to show how this vast facility would have a very different feel, despite it being only 20,000 square feet in length. So, the 20,000 square feet of space, 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 20,000 square feet of one of the things that the building committee charged us with at the outset is, number one, that the building at some level a traditional feel to it, and that can mean many different things to many people. But the principal thing that came across through that is picturesque, and that has an aesthetic component, but I would argue, and many others have argued, more importantly, has some very significant benefits to the maintenance, to the durability, to the weather tightness of the building. There is some cost, obviously, involved in doing this, more than a conventional flat roof, but that dictated certain aspects of our approach to design. But more importantly, we wanted to do, and again, you'll hear me say this many times tonight, our principal goal in this design was to make this the most efficient envelope that we could possibly imagine. We really took that as our charge here. There are a dozen different architects that could come up with several dozen different variations, and probably many of them fascinating and appropriate as an educational solution to your needs of the school. But we took it as our charge to address all of those concerns, but recognizing that these are difficult times and that budget concerns are certainly paramount in everybody's minds, that our goal is to make the most materially efficient, energy conserving buildings we can possibly imagine, and do it in a way that utilizes a number of passive technologies and may benefit from higher technology features should those make economic sense. But fundamentally, it's about smart planning, insulation, and dealing with sort of natural environment capacity. So I'm going to talk about this in more detail as we go along. But fundamentally, again, I note to you the scale of the building. It is effectively 3 stories, and we followed a basic logic that says there are a substantial number of facilities here that don't require outside light or windows, and it's foolish to place those above ground, build walls that are exposed to the outside air and all of the inclement weather, and when they can be tucked in whole or in part below ground, where they're only exposed to the difference between indoor and ground temperature, 55 degrees versus 70 degrees. And they're bulk and mass. They can be so unsightly, particularly in a residential neighborhood, can be submerged in the earth in a way that they don't represent an enormous sense of construction. So in this image, a substantial number of those facilities are down below. I'll point those out in a moment, but there are things like locker rooms and film studios and other shop kinds of functions that really specifically do not want outside light. There's a secondary collection and function that requires some outside light, but not necessarily an abundance of it. Nurses' offices, certain administrative kinds of spaces, the kitchen, and that occurs at this intermediate level, or really the main level, you see here with punched openings. And then finally, the classrooms. And one of the things we heard, probably the only positive thing we heard at all from the teaching staff here about this building is the enjoyment of all the windows. And as I mentioned in our last presentation, there's a reason why the 1950s, 1960s ubiquitous school building looks the way it does, with a ribbon window that goes from wall to wall. It really makes for a wonderful interior, if not an exterior, bringing lots of natural light into the space, making it possible as a very effective daylighting solution to control use of lighting. And that's something that the teaching staff here and every place we've been to is always well. And so our concept in the upper floor, which is where the majority of the classrooms, routine classrooms are located, is to just liberally provide windows around. Again, more to that point. So that's a basic overview of the massing issue. I'm going to take you through the floor plans here. We'll start with the entry level. I've flipped the orientation relative to what we saw on the site plan a moment ago. So now a little more turnpike right here, going north-south. North is that direction. The playfields are to the right. The main entry is down at this area. And principally, students, faculty, guests would arrive at that dry courtyard that we saw, pass through a little gate into a sort of a patio kind of space, where some gathering could occur. Principal entrance door is here, lead into the space. Auditorium immediately to your right, set up in such a way that it can be segregated independent use of the school is not in session. A cafeteria space directly in front of you. We're going to talk about that in more detail for the moment. You might think of it as more like a food court than a cafeteria. It doesn't have enclosing walls, at least in this concept it doesn't. They ultimately move in a different direction. That is our thought at this point. The gymnasium down in the center, and we're now at the upper level of a 2-story space. Again, I'll have sections where you second, which I'll explain now. But you've walked in, you come into the lobby, you step down a couple of steps, you're in this open food court areas, and when you get right to here, you're on a balcony now that overlooks the courts down below. And the version that you're seeing in this drawing here, these are all bleachers which are stretched out in the configuration that it would be set up for a special event. Again, a little more detail about the gymnasium and how that all works in a moment. Just to ask you to keep this image fresh in your mind. These bleacher seating here, stretched out, tiered down, courts down below, the ability to leave those courts, walk up the tiers, gain access to the lobby area, which will be a terrific advantage during special events in which concessions might actually occur all over the year. On either side of the gymnasium, there are corridor areas, and our vision is that this is all opened up for glass, so that circulating around the perimeter, there's a sense of the activity, the intense activity that occurs in the gym, and one really doesn't see that as just being off the perimeter somewhere, but it's really in the center of the school. Separated by the corridors for physical reasons, and the kinds of functions that occur around it are not so much sensitive to the noise that might be going on there. So the wings, these are of course the pitch cruise areas on the left and right, set up in such a way that faculty lounge and the main administration here, so visitors arriving have immediate eye contact with the administration as they enter the building. So nurses suite here. This is the functional skills room and other support functions as we go down. Toilet rooms, much more generous, common use toilet rooms here that can be used in conjunction with the auditorium. And then the servery, so students or visitors coming for meals can enter it, the servery, pick up their food, leave that servery, and open the door with kitchen functions, so backstage kitchen functions occurring here rather than service entrance. And then other support functions. So one of the functions that presently does occur down in your basement, your child development program, is not well integrated in the school at all, and that is indeed one that would appreciate natural light as much as any other space here. We brought that right out from the center here. That's zone entrance directly off to the terrace area. Parents can come in, there's short-term parking reserved here to drop off purchases to that child development area. And it works in conjunction with, there's a common use seminar room, the culinary arts program is here. So we see some wonderful sympathetic work going on amongst the people involved with that, with the ability to sort of triage food events out of the kitchen, the culinary arts area in support of the things that might be going on. General perspective, again, I remind you that at the northern end of the site where that gym is, now we're up at the grade level, and there's a, you'll see in the section in a moment, there's a manor which one descends down a half a level into the terrace area, which in turn brings you to the entrance to the gym. You can see that lower level in the section. But the internal organization of the building tries to be very simply structured around 4 principal stairs that bring you up and down and are connected to the secondary and tertiary entrances from the sides. So lower level, if we went down any of those stairs, say we went down here, we arrived at that lower level lobby. It occurs to me, I didn't explain the auditorium well, we'll come back to that in just a second. But one comes down to the lower level lobby here, complex with lockers centralized in the building, again, a space that has no need for outside light, just wanted in fact, and exits out into the gymnasium area. Again, I'm going to talk about the different configuration you see there here in a moment. And then banks underneath those administrative classroom spaces above are these, well, it's primarily flexible shop space, which we see as constructed as concrete floors and exposed structure, and really good working space with solid walls where benches can be built along the perimeter. There is, because of the way the section is structured, there's opportunity for outside light at a higher elevation, which in shop environment works best. And you don't like to consume the perimeter wall area for windows that are down low. And then we have again, I'll describe this in a little more detail in connection with the auditorium, scene shop and the music program here with a light court specifically for the music. I bypassed the auditorium, go back here. The auditorium, again, the principal entrance would be through this main entrance to your right into an auditorium. We have a couple of different versions of the auditorium we've looked at. One of our personal favorites is the more kind of an amphitheater arrangement with tiered kinds of seatings and rather steep, leading to a broader, wider stage. And in that version, this was turned 90 degrees. There were some comments from the building committee and others that they really appreciated the way your present so-called proscenium stage is set up, more traditional proscenium, with a gradually sloping floor and an elevated stage here with a so-called proscenium arch at this point. And so we wanted to illustrate that such an arrangement is perfectly possible here as well. So as a result of the fact that that floor descends, so it starts to find its way down into the lower level. So here's where that stage is, and we propose that there be a big set of overhead doors such that the scene shot back here can be open to the adjacent stage. Again, a few other comments about that. Now in turn, if we went to that top floor, the one I showed you in the image that has all the glass around it. So our concept was to try to get the general use classroom areas, treat them as generically as possible to allow the staff the absolute most flexibility possible in terms of what could go on there. Now there are certain kinds of classrooms that have very specific needs, science classrooms in particular. There are 4 organized back up here that are equipped with things like fume hoods and lab tables and compressed air and other features that are important to a modern high school science curriculum. So those are somewhat specialized. For the most part, however, there is a standard classroom arrangement. I'll show you a little more detail in a moment. It finds its way around the perimeter. We worked with the staff in coming up with the ideal number for that, which I'll explore a little further. In the center of all this is the so-called learning commons. And concepts about libraries in modern high schools have really evolved in art, evolving by the minute as the years go by here, largely in response to just the continued reliance on technology and an understanding that a library needs to support many, many different kinds of learning and studying styles. Your staff and superintendent's office articulated a vision of a learning commons that makes it possible to support all those kinds of things, and one in which a variety of support functions can be organized around to really collectively work towards the sort of common goal of educating the students in the most comprehensive way. So this is kind of the traditional open reading area, which in this case indeed is in fact open to a 2-story space that admits natural light from the skylight up above down into the lobby area below. But this is for the sort of Starbucks learners, let's call them, those that take their laptops and go into public spaces and somehow are never fazed by the noise that goes on around them, and maybe even helped by it to some degree. But there are many other kinds of learning, and some would be more private accommodations. And so there are a series of rooms that occur around the perimeter of the space here, different sizes and for different styles, set up like computer rooms, places that are really more consistent with a modern idea about a library in the sense that they're sort of less about books and more about technology. For those of us who are sentimental about books, and I count myself amongst them, there are open stacks and they're out in this area, and one can bring the perimeter of some of these spaces with similar kinds of things. But the guidance suite would occur over here, the college counseling suite would occur over here. It's all seen in the school's vision for this, that these are all sympathetically just working towards the whole education of the student. Lastly, there is one open court in the building, up at this upper level now. So coming from the science room, there's a greenhouse located right here, and this is now open to the sky. Okay, so an open court space sits over top of the roof of the gym, so it's relatively small, but large enough to support certain kinds of science functions that might benefit from having an outdoor space. In this case, very secure, nothing you need to worry about after hours. So cutting sections, and let me just go back. I wanted to show you how this is going to work. So we've taken the building and cut it and looking laterally through it. So if I took saw, so to speak, and cut through the building here and look this direction, so I'm looking at the banks of classrooms on either side and the 2-story space of the gym. It looks like this. And so, and this is frankly a somewhat earlier version. At that point, the grade is a little bit lower on this side, so it would be comparable to what you see there. Actually, they're both moving down just a little bit, allowing for the opportunity for natural light at the upper portions of the shop spaces that you see here. But essentially, these 2 banks of 3-story elements. So in this, it happens to be through shops, through administration, through classroom. And again, shops in this version, yes, staff space in classroom. There are 2 additional classrooms up above. There are mechanical units that are pictured here. I'll talk about that in a little bit more detail in a moment. And then that two-story, the open courtyard space, which really supports the science curriculum here, with a two-story gymnasium that you see all in this area, which has high natural light looking out to the north, so it's not a source of glare of the athletic functions that occur there, but does provide some form of pleasant outside light. Now, if I cut a section now through the main lobby area, so I've essentially just turned around 180 degrees. I'm looking south now, and I've moved back into the lobby area. So I'm looking back towards the existing Morgan High School, and this is the upper balcony of the so-called learning commons up in here, with a bridge that spans across that low balcony condition. There are books and things on the other side, a long skylight up above, the lobby area here, some stairwell elements that you're seeing here and here, and this effectively is a substantial area devoted to the locker functions, which doesn't require a particularly high ceiling. This is getting way ahead of ourselves. Lots of different ways to solve this, but amongst the many passive solar design features that we're interested in are things that the skylight affords, and that would be configured in such a way as to be effectively a big heat exchanger. And you provide glass on the exterior, glass on the interior, create a cavity in between the two. In wintertime conditions, one draws off the heat, which would accumulate that, distribute it throughout the building with fans. A very old-fashioned, very primitive way of providing passive source of heating for some of these spaces. In the summertime, you have operable sections that allow for the natural ventilation of the space, creating a Venturi effect to draw up the heated air out of the building, depending on the status of air conditioning. And the last section is now I've turned 90 degrees. Okay, so the south is in that direction, looking back towards the existing Morgan School, the gym at this end. So typically, visitors and students arrive through that courtyard. We'll cut through this auditorium area with the sloping floor with classrooms up above. A portion of that two-story lobby space with the skylight up above. The cafeteria space, a couple of steps down, with a little balcony overlooking the gym. You're seeing the windows that in turn are from those perimeter corridors down into the gymnasium space, and the sunken terrace, which provides a transitional entrance into the gymnasium from the north. Okay, let's touch a little bit on some of the passive design features of this. We're interested in the kind of architectural language that can be built around those things, and having the sort of strong, massive base here, in which we have a series of punched openings, provides at some level a kind of a traditional organization of the building mass, where it's kind of a strong base in the middle and a nice roof. Things like one would want to explore the possibilities of doing a very durable, a very highly insulated perimeter at this level, super insulated perhaps. Windows are recessed deeply. Sunscreens are positioned over the windows in such a way that they provide protection against strong south light and east and west light, for that matter, for some of these windows. These windows, of course, were provided with substantial roof overhangs, which have many benefits, controlling the runoff of water, deterioration of windows that would otherwise be exposed to the elements, makes it possible to introduce a language of wood, which we would really welcome here, and get it completely undercover in such a way that there's a liberal use of wood, but without the detriment of it being exposed to the elements, where it tends to be somewhat vulnerable. So a variety of passive features of that nature. By passive, I mean they don't require moving parts. They're just sort of implicit in the logic of the building. However, the roof we propose at this point could be many different materials. One wants to be a durable, long-term one. So this is I would consider a somewhat less flattering view of things, but it tells a story a little bit about how that massing works and some of its benefits. So we're envisioning, again, in the interest of real simplicity and of the most compact plans we can, organizing it into this singular rectangle here, and developing it with perimeter roof areas where they have some special aesthetic benefit and where they can shed water from the perimeter walls. In this arrangement, which shows these three principal banks here, these are all oriented towards the south. And the roof angle has been calculated on the optimal angle for solar gain in this particular latitude. So our office was involved in what at that time was the largest installation of PV panel systems for any public school, any public building in the state of Connecticut, just a few years ago now. So we have pretty good experience with this. This, I would say, would be far better because of that ability. And so we would suggest that if the economics support this, meaning if there is funds available either through the Connecticut Clean Energy Fund, if the evolution of the solar industry should move positively, if just as the well number crunching suggests to you that there are significant operating benefits to making the investment in the panels, that's something you should do. And if the numbers today or 3 years from now or whenever it should be don't support it at that time, you have a fundamental infrastructure here to support the subsequent installation of a solar system if and when it should become more appropriate for you. But in any case, there are 3 very long banks here, again, precise orientation to maximize solar gain, just set up essentially to be able to receive those panels. This is the open area, the light court below. These actually are the footprint of the mechanical units, rooftop mechanical units that we can provide stairs for direct access to, ease of maintenance, but none of it ever gets seen because it's concealed behind the mats of the roof. Okay, so I just want to take a few minutes here and just kind of go over this square footage issue and what it means, how it translates into better efficiencies for you. Again, I'll remind you, our goal here is to make the most efficient 135,000 square foot building we could possibly come up with. So let's do a comparison with existing versus new. On the top of all the images you're about to see is existing, and below is all proposed. Here's the footprint of the existing building, 133,850 square feet. 158,000 total because of course there's no space. Our footprint is proposed to 53,655. So looking at those two, that represents the amount of roof and perimeter wall and foundations that one has to contend with today. By comparison, that's what the 3-story building generates. So the first question in your mind might be, well, so what are we getting up here? We have 158,000 square feet. How are we getting down to 135 without sacrificing something? And I'm suggesting that we're doing it in 2 ways. Number one, the intense inefficiency of this plant relative to the way one circulates through the building, use of corridors, that sort of thing. By the use of logical planning, we can take care of 10,000 square feet of that right out of the gate. So, and then the remaining 10,000 square feet comes essentially with the elimination of 10 classrooms. Right now, Morgan has, roughly speaking, 40 general use classrooms. And working with the educational staff here and looking at how the schedule works, 30 seems to be a much more reasonable number. And I would just have you kind of do the simple math on that. If no student at any given time were in gym, or at the cafeteria, or at art, or in music, or at any kind of in the auditorium, or in any kind of a special program, then you would have an average of 20 students per classroom when you have 30 classrooms. And that scenario I just described to you probably happens very rare in the course of a school day. There's lots of activities and shop, by the way, which I didn't mention, and gym. So a variety of things they may be at any given moment. So 30 seems like the reasonable number. So in terms of usable area, whereas that's the graphic illustrating the footprint of the existing building, and this is the new, that's what it looks like when one just takes the accumulated usable area of the 2 schools in comparison to. Okay. So the real benefits of that are, well, they're manifold. It starts, of course, with the roof. And Gerry mentioned the $4 million price tag associated with re-roofing this building. And so essentially everything of that footprint is what we call flat roof. Now, technically it's not flat. Some of it has a pitch, but it's all covered with this so-called membrane roof system, which effectively has a 20-year lifespan. And so 130,860 square feet of it is essentially that. That's the graphic illustrates that. In our proposed building, the combined roof area of pitched roof and flat roof, 53,665. So a very substantial drop, just again, right at the get-go. In fact, 46% reduction in that total roof area. And in some ways, more to the point of the reduction of, again, which I will in shorthand call flat roof. So 133,000 square feet of so-called flat roof. But if one deducts the standing seam metal roof that we're showing, which is a 50-year roof, not a 20-year roof, with maintenance perhaps even longer, the amount of flat roof area those $4 million price tag kinds of 20-year projects that you're struggling with, that gets reduced down by 89%, to 50,000 square feet. Along those same lines, this building, because it's just accretion of all these additions, is made up by some rough estimate, hard to calculate exactly, of 26 different roof types, meaning roof popping up, going down, being in a different elevation than the one adjacent to it. I'm sure you can all appreciate that in roof design, the most vulnerable point in any roof is not just in the middle of the roof area, but the point where you have transition, where flashing occurs, where certain roof angles have to occur. So 26 existing, the dots here represent the number of new roof angles. We consider the pitched roofs to be 1, the ridge is rarely a source of a leak, and so 9 is composed of 26. And then, and this is a real estimate, but very conservatively, we did a linear calculation of the amount of flashing. So all the areas where special flashing is required between different roof levels. And, you know, conservative estimate, 10,000 lineals, almost 2 miles of flashing that exists in this building, which you all have to contend with on a regular basis. And because of the way we can see things here, that made a 93% reduction in the amount of flashing area, goes down to 1,600. Okay, and then lastly, in some ways, most importantly, in terms of energy conservation, is perimeter wall area. If you took all of the perimeter area of this whole building and you stretched it out, called it 30 feet high, and drew a little graphic of it, it stretches out to about almost 70,000 square feet of perimeter wall. Most of it uninsulated, all of it generating heat out in the wintertime, all of it representing a maintenance concern, and has to be dealt with over the life of the building. By comparison, in the 3-story building, accounting for portions of it being below grade, we get a 40% reduction down to 38,000 square feet. That all translates into A, lower construction costs, and B, lower operating costs. So, I mentioned 10,000 square feet taken out for efficiency, 10,000 square feet taken out for classrooms. I'm sure you're all interested in auditorium, gym. Many in the community have expressed interest in that. There was really overwhelming consensus during the design process about the need to have an oversized auditorium. So the state, as a rule, they will reimburse you for an auditorium that accommodates 1/2 the enrollment of the school, 300 seats, as compared to the 700 plus that you have today. And the community was really of a singular mind here in saying that, yeah, we hear you, but that auditorium is really important to the life of the town. There are really important events that happen there, and it was really seen as critical to this process that we give you a so-called oversized auditorium. So here's the footprint of the existing auditorium, the house area, and the stage. Here's the footprint of our proposed auditorium, which I want to qualify and say it is the house, the stage, and the scene shop. What you don't have today, you don't have a place where you can make sets, you don't have a place to store sets. It's a significant problem. Your fire marshal is greatly concerned about it, has raised the issue a number of times when he sees things that he takes exception to. We need to provide that scene shop. So we feel our responsibility is to include that as part of this, and since we have certain square footage limitations we have to meet, the seating capacity of the auditorium is a little bit less here than it is today, but we're still talking about something significantly about 600 or so. So more than double, well, essentially the school enrollment, let's say. Now, the process that follows, should this pass a referendum, again, we're not voting on whether it's this auditorium or any other auditorium. We're voting on 135,000 square feet. If the will of the community is to say, we want 700 and whatever seats, then so be it, and that can be dealt with in that process, working with whoever the architect is to do it. But again, it's right now, square foot per square foot, we're matched up there. So the gym, that also was obviously of great concern. The state puts no limitations specifically or explicitly on gyms. You can make them as big or as small as you want, but there's a cap on the overall square footage of the building. So the more space you devote to gym, the less space you have to devote to classrooms. And we explored a number of different options about how to handle that. If one looks at the existing 2-gym arrangement, here's your practice gym here. Here is your larger gym here, drawn at scale with the others. So 6,650 square feet for the smaller, 9,310 feet for the larger. Total of 15,000, call it 16,000 square feet of space devoted to the gym area. We have proposed that you take the overall area, that we try to achieve the same functionality of the 2 gyms but you do it with less overall square footage, but with the use of an operable partition, make for a gym that has greater capacity for special spectator events. So set up, this is turned 90 degrees again, so that it compares graphically with the existing. These are two variations now on the proposed gym. So your two-part gym looks like this. Set up in a normal day in, day out kind of practice arrangement. A partition system is provided an enclosed arrangement here. There's sufficient space for a regulation-sized high school basketball court with enough space around the perimeter for a singular bench, so you can get 50 or 100 people in here for events that are perhaps of less public interest, maybe a wrestling match at the opposite, that kind of thing. But in the event that you have a special function, the grudge match, rival basketball game against your cross-town opponent, one can retract that partition. There are lines painted on the floor that make it possible to reorient the gym. Nets come down from above, reorient the court in such a way that you now have a substantial perimeter area. So now, for special events, you've got something that's 13,700 square feet, not including the area of the cafeteria and the perimeter corridor area that serve as balconies for viewing events that are occurring down below. So, bottom line is that you're building less overall square footage, 13,700 versus 16,000 for an existing gym. But you're getting a special event gym, which itself allows for a 47% expansion in seating capacity, not including cafeteria in the perimeter corridor area. So we think of that as just a logical way to save on construction costs and make for a more flexible gymnasium space. I'll also mention that the technology of these retracting doors has come a heck of a long way since the ones that you have that probably haven't had no years. Cafeteria, not much to talk about. The space we're in right now, 4,670, 4,690, essentially the same. Albeit again, ours imagined functioning in a different manner in this food court function, which is a choice that can be made as the scheme is developed. And then finally, the typical classrooms. The classrooms in this school vary in size significantly. There are some that are a little smaller, some that are a little bigger, but the more typical ones range from 740 square feet to 840 square feet. That's a typical arrangement. This is one that's 760. There tends to be a door from the corridor and the open space and not much else. There have been a number of comments from your staff and teachers about wanting dedicated storage space and some thoughts about shared office space and different ways in which the classrooms can be staffed. So at present, we're devoting some of that square footage to dedicated storage space, shared office space, places for two faculty members to collaborate, to meet with a student in special meetings that are not necessarily overlapping with the classroom space. So that's one idea. And again, this is here primarily to put your mind at ease that reduction in square footage is not being taken out of the usable gross area of each classroom. Okay, so I'm getting near the end. The last features I just want to mention, well, really a couple of things. One of the questions on your mind might be, gee, we've got a 158,000 square foot school building, and you're telling me it can accommodate 860. We have a projection of enrollment of 600, and you're building a school to that. What should happen if Clinton should go through an unpredictable change, and suddenly your student population grows significantly? Will we look foolish for having torn down a much larger school and built a smaller one? And since the likelihood of that happening at that particular scale, the demographic phenomenon I just described, is quite low, one does not want to actually design for a substantially larger enrollment than you're actually planning to have, and of course the state wouldn't be university for. But you do have to have a strategy to deal with that issue. So I bring up this image to show you just a little example of the dorm, which is primarily meant to illustrate how we would approach that. The traditional way of expanding on school is to expand out laterally. And that means disruption of the site, changing the site features, parking, drive-up parking lots. It often means mobile units or trailers and that kinds of things, modular units that are clipped onto the perimeter of the building. They're never a happy marriage. And there are significant costs associated with those. So I want to talk about how we deal with that. I also want to just put in your head an image that you see over here of the bell, which I'll just touch on in a moment. But towards the idea of expandability, our thought is that because of this roof configuration and the fact that we have an attic here, we have the opportunity to expand up as opposed to out. And this is absolutely no different than what you all do with your homes. Many of you, I'm sure, have done this. You've got a house, you've got an unfinished attic, and you go up into your attic and you expand on that, and it provides terrific expandable space for you. We would propose that as part of the initial design, we oversize footings, we oversize steel columns in certain locations. We don't build anything more than that, but we provide the necessary structural infrastructure to support expansion into an attic space at a later time. And those things I just described are incremental costs. They represent very little added cost to build at this time. One can take that much further and start affecting mechanical systems. There will be a point where you're paying significantly more, and probably doesn't make sense to leave that for this other day when your enrollment has gone up significantly, and at which point surely Clinton has had some good times. But the thought is that you would expand up into that attic. The dormer window I showed you a moment ago, a variation of that, a big long shed dormer would be developed on one side, possibly even two sides. Each side being allowed to accommodate 5 additional classrooms, maybe some support spaces in between, and kind of a similar structure, all of which could be built, would require some phasing. It's a significant construction. You wouldn't want to be doing very heavy stuff during times when the school is occupied. But again, I put that out there because I think there's a responsible way to address the growth needs of the school over time. So, and finally, and this is just a side point again, absolutely in that category of things that is just so far ahead of ourselves, but fun to think about. The building committee, some in particular, spoke about a fondness for the idea of the tower, particularly because it existed in the original Morgan School. I'm being really tough-minded and kind of a grouse about the whole thing and saying, yeah, you can't afford the tower. It's $250,000 for something that you can't use and has problems to heat, cool, and get access to, and doesn't have any function, et cetera, et cetera. So our virtual tower is essentially taking a wall. This is actually one of the outboard walls of the auditorium, carving a niche and lining it with stone, taking the original stone plaque that exists out here, taking the bell that exists out here, featuring it in the courtyard, making something special that really you can appreciate at eye level, down low, every day as you come and go out of school. Needing an opportunity to treat this wall as a big decorative element speaks about the history of Clinton, who knows what. They're all developed around this open. So that's pretty much it. So my closing comments, I have 2 things to say. One is just to return to this. In terms of the history of the school, we tried, the committee asked us for this months ago. Wanted to see images early on, and we resisted and resisted. We really want the expressions of the building to really derive from a logical process of understanding what it needs, what it wants to be. And I'm glad we held off, and I feel like the character of the school is really dictated by this problem-solving, understanding how it relates to matters of material conservation, energy conservation, but also the character of a residential neighborhood being low scale. We try to be very simple in our detailing. We haven't gussied it up with a whole lot of detail. We've got one dormer up in here. Our office, we particularly feel that there's a lot of potential in the richness of simple structures like this. At the risk of bringing in an analogy that some of you might find a little, maybe that's too strong a word, but we like to think of the agricultural structures. They're part of sort of the New England tradition that have, in their spirit, they're sort of built about being efficient and thoughtful and well-conceived and in tune with their environment and not spending money on frills, built up over time. But we think really have a terrific sort of character and integrity, tobacco barns, other kinds of agricultural structures. Those don't have to be quite so utilitarian. We think there's a handsome image that can be developed out of that. But again, it's sort of driven by an interest in the spirit of conservation in all of that eternity. So, my last editorial comment, now I'll turn it over here, is to try to shed some light on the question that's in front of you right now with regard to the yes or no vote. And it's not my place to really, in a sense, argue for one or the other. I do want to just shed light on the nature of this vote. So, I think a yes vote is very good. Yes vote means that you believe that Morgan School needs a school right now, and that this represents the right opportunity, and that you shouldn't wait. A no vote can mean many things. And I'm going to suggest to you that what it probably means is that you believe that the Morgan School, the Morgan High School, that the town of Clinton does not need or should not have a new high school for probably 20 years, probably 10 to 20 years, let's say. You're presented with an opportunity right now to acquire a piece of property which is really quite extraordinary. It's available today. It may not be available next year or 2 years or 3 years from now. If it were, who knows what the price tag would be. So that's an opportunity which presented itself. It's on the table now. There's no guarantees it will be on the table in the future. We're in an environment of record bond rates. The cost of borrowing money is as low as it's been in the history of the country. That situation may not be with us in 2 years, 3 years, 5 years from now. Although we're on the backside of it, we're still dealing with a pretty motivated construction industry right now. The bidding environment is still favorable, and but the trend is going in the other direction, so the likelihood is delaying 2, 3, 4 years will only add to the cost. And then finally, if you were to stay here, there's just some work that has to be done. The roof replacement is the $4 million that's been shared, and there's code compliance work that needs to be done. When that money is invested, that was what would be several $1 million into this school, that money is on the books, and you'll get support from the state on that. That reimbursement will be treated as a disbursement to the town of Clinton. And should you change your mind a few years from now and decide this isn't working, we need to consider a new school, and this building gets torn down and there's a plowback. The state says, well, not so fast. We gave you X number of $1 million for this, but you didn't carry it through for 20 years, so they start to prorate that and start to impact your return. So again, final comment on this. So in essence, I think it's reasonable to go through a thought process and say, yeah, we can make this work for 20 years if we pass the no vote. My own opinion, and that's all it is that to pass the no vote, I think there are problems with hoping that we can just get past this difficult economic time where we're all under salary pressures and think a couple years down the road might be better. That ship may have sailed.
I just want to publicly thank David Thompson for the work that he's done for us, the town of Clinton, and our committee. He's provided services to this town that far exceed the scope of his contract. I just wanted to thank him for that. He's been a pleasure to work with. I'd like to introduce now Bob Lynn, who has worked with us. He's from the Gilbane Corporation, Gilbane Construction Management Company, and he is the one that's provided the cost estimates that we've been working with. So he'll go over a quick description of the costs associated.
Thank you, Jerry. Good evening. My name is Bob Lynn. I work for the Gilbane Building Company. And the building committee engaged Gilbane about 2 years ago, early 2010, to do the master plan facility investigation of this building. Since that time, we've worked very closely with David Thompson to evaluate the cost of the concept that he very eloquently just proposed to you. Just a couple of words about what goes into an estimate. An estimate is by its very nature just that. It's not something written in stone. An estimate comes along with a set of assumptions and clarifications, is the vernacular of the industry. And I just want to go over a couple of those with you. The estimate that I'm going to present to you now is based on the conceptual design that David just proposed to you. It's not a set of completed design documents, so there are certain inaccuracies within the concept estimate. This estimate presumes that the design will commence this year, 2012, pending referendum approval. And it carries in it escalation for 2 years for the construction start in the first quarter of 2014. And I raise that to tell you because that's being done intentionally, because that would save 1 year of escalation for the buyout of construction if we were to delay design 1 year and then delay construction. 1 year. That 1 year savings is about $1.7 million in the bottom line cost. Additionally, within this estimate are 3 different contingencies. There's something called a design contingency, and the reason for that is we're basing the estimate on a concept. That concept is going to get developed and evolve through the course of about a 1 year design process. So there is a design contingency to cover that. There's a construction contingency that belongs to the construction manager once he puts a shovel in the ground, so he has a contingency to work with if there are things that happen, for instance, extra rock excavation, which costs a little more to put the foundation into the ground. And lastly, there's an owner contingency on the bottom line, and in this estimate, that's $3 million. So the aggregate of those 3 contingencies is about $7.5 million, so there's buffer in the estimate. The estimate includes property purchases that you heard about, moving all of the hoop houses off of the property. It includes all of the soft costs, all of the architect's cost to design the building, all of his sub-consulting engineers, and it includes all of the hard costs to build the building. It includes the extension of utilities, bringing water in from where it is now, bringing gas up Route 81 to bring those utilities onto the property. It includes all the FF&E, which is short for fixtures, furnishings, and equipment. The tables, chairs, that's everything that is what would be considered loose equipment inside the building. Lastly, it includes the building of the athletic fields, which you saw at the top of David's site plan. So the grand total, you may have heard already, is $64.75 million. And as I mentioned, that includes those contingency items, it includes escalation, and it includes all the cost. It even includes moving the population from this building to the new building when it's ready to open. A little bit about reimbursement. The state school construction grant process reimburses communities at varying levels depending upon the relative economic wealth of the community. Clinton's current reimbursement rate is 36%. So that $64 million divides out to be $19.1 million from the state, and $45.6 million will be paid by the town of Clinton. So that, in a nutshell, is the estimate for this building and this project. Thank you.
Kevin Kane is our director, or director of finances in the town of Clinton. We've thrown him into the fire really quick here because he's only been around for about a year, but he's done a great job for us. And he's going to go over the tax implications to the town of Clinton and how the bond works.
It's free.
I apologize if it's a little small for you, but if anybody has questions now or later, you can always call town hall right before education. You know, right now, if you look at this project, the maximum cost is $64.7 million. The maximum cost of Clinton is $45.6 million. You know, remember, that's the maximum cost. I mean, there's a couple variables out there, how much it's going to cost you. If you look at this project, you hear about $7 million in contingency. The goal here is basically to spend less than we will need. So basically, I'm trying to tell everybody here, I'm going to give you the worst case scenario. Current interest rates, I'm really giving you several things going across here. You're seeing what the town's cost is, 45.6. You know, you see 4 columns going across. You're seeing the current rate here is 2.75%. I think for all of us, we really shouldn't plan on that, okay? Because, you know, rates do go up and so forth. So our financial advisor recommends, for planning purpose, for tax purpose, for all of you, to use a rate between 4 and 5%. So it really kind of gives you like the worst case scenario. So what I'm trying to tell you right now is, if you look at these numbers and so forth, at a 4%, it's going to cost the average person about 8.7% over that 20-year period. If you're paying $10,000 in taxes, assume $870 change every year in your taxes. It's not, it's just a fix. So you're gonna pay $870. If you're paying $1,000, you're gonna be paying another $87. Now, if this project comes in lower, now if this project comes in much lower at 95 or 90%, you can actually just do the math. If I'm telling you it's 8.7% and it comes at 90%, it's going to cost you 7.9%.
Can you please repeat that from the beginning, from what you said when you weren't using the microphone? If you have, say, a $10,000 tax liability this year, or $5,000, whatever the case may be, once this is built, what will that mean the next year, and what will it mean in the second year and the third year?
It's basically, what I'm really telling you is it's going to be the same impact every year. So it's not an increment. If you're paying $10,000 or $1,000 in taxes today, it's going to increase you to $1,087. That $87 change is going to be a 20-year. It's going to go into 20 years. So you're actually going to be paying 20 times $87. So instead of telling you what the average assessment in Clinton, because we're all different. People will say, you know, the average assessment in Clinton, based on the grant list, is approximately $190,000. When you look at average assessment, the average assessment is based on a 70% ratio. So that house that was assessed at $190,000 was really assessed at $270,000 for the grant list. Yes?
Do these figures that you generated, do they take into consideration any profit from the sale of the existing facility?
They do not.
I'm going to entertain questions after
Yeah.
everybody's done, and you'll be able to ask Kevin, or Bob, or Dave. I just want to get everybody done with the presentation first, and then we'll entertain questions after.
When you're doing a financing, that I know most of us have mortgages and so forth, and we pay a mortgage, and our mortgage might be 5%, 4%, but basically it's low amortization, which means basically when you have a 30-year mortgage or 15-year mortgage, and you're paying $1,000 a month, whatever it may be, the first month, you're paying $10 principal, $990 interest. Municipal finance is a little different. We're actually doing a 20-year bond issue. It's really 20 bond issues. If it's a $40 million bond issue, it's $2 million, $2 million, $2 million. And each year it has a different rate. The first year, that little piece may be 2%. The last year may be 5%. That's why it's a weighted average cost. So what you're really going to see, you're going to see declines in interest every year. One thing with structuring a bond issue, right now, if I'm looking at this, it's really based on your cash flow analysis and so forth. There's spending guidelines on any capital project. For a school project, there's a 24-month spending guideline. You have to have so much spent within a certain time period. So when you look at this project, it's my goal is to finance the known cost. So you don't want to overbond the project. You don't want to overtax the citizens. And more than likely, you're going to do 2, maybe 3 bond issues. Your first bond issue, if rates are right, you're going to try to finance as much as possible up front because you want to fix it. If you look at those numbers going across and you look at how much it really costs in additional interest, you see at today's rates, and I don't want to use today's rates, over a 20-year period, it's $12 million of interest at 2.75%. But using a more conservative rate at 4%, it creates an extra $6 million of cost to the citizens. So that's one reason when you really want to fix the rates as soon as possible. It's very competitive. You know, other than that, that's it for now. But I'm always around to ask any questions. You can call me, you can send me emails, and I'll respond.
Our next speaker, Willie Fritz, he's still here, is going to go over some of what we hope will relieve some of the tax burden for the town of Clinton, and that is a projected tax revenue from the sale of the existing site.
You can't do that. You're really going to sell it alone. If you get a situation like Collins, they don't pay anything. They don't pay at all. So you don't gain money. There's no revenue there. So it's projected.
Thank everybody for coming tonight. Excuse my appearance. We just played 6 games of basketball against a bunch of 8th graders. So I'm sore right now. I want to go over, Kevin was asked a question about potential revenues from the sale of the existing property. And we had a volunteer to do an analysis for us. Bob Ward did a nice job. He compared some similar commercial properties in town, specifically the Clinton Crossing. I had done a quick and dirty a couple of weeks ago and came up with some numbers, and we had Bob do a little bit more in-depth analysis. So, you want to flip it for me, sir? Okay. What we did, and Bob did, was he took the acreage, okay, came up with the building square footage, the appraisal of the land average, the land assessed appraisal, and the assessment per acre on the 3 different sites. The most appropriate to use, obviously, would be the Clinton Crossing site because it is adjacent to the existing high school. And you can see by that number, and I like to use the assessed values because that's what you're taxed on, is the assessed value. It's $124 round numbers per acre, $124,000 per acre. Then he went into the buildings for the appraised value based on the square footage and the assessed value. And he came with an average assessment per square foot, again using Clinton Crossings, of $119 a square foot. So the total appraised value for Clinton Crossings is $54,830,000. The total assessed is $38,381,000. Simple math, round numbers. Take that $38 million and multiply it, divide it by 1,000, and then multiply it times 25, and you can figure out what the taxes Clinton Crossings pays on an annual basis on the land and the buildings. Next slide, sir. Okay, so this is analysis of estimated real estate taxes on the properties, again, that we talked about. And assessing them, taking the three different properties, again, the bottom one is the Clinton Crossings. Assessed at $119 a square foot with the mill rate at the $24.92 with the size of the existing property that we have versus the Clinton Crossings. The Clinton Crossings at the assessed value that using $119 a square foot brings in $383,778,000 if it were a 100,000 square foot building. On 150,000, this is the existing property, excuse me. On a 150,000 square foot building, we could generate $532,000, and on a 200,000 square foot building, the town would generate $608,000. This is on the existing property. Again, if we were to build on the existing property 100,000 square foot, which is the number I've been using, there is a 160,000 square foot building there already. But based on zoning, because of the use of the building, the minimum amount of parking spaces required for whatever use of the building would be, I would not anticipate anything more than 100 at this time. So again, being conservative on the low side, potential, in Bob's opinion, the number to use would be $383,000, $768 in tax revenue on the existing property on an annual basis. That's on the building itself, that's not the land. Next slide, please, sir. Now we get to the land. Again, going back and using the $124,000 per acre value at the Clinton Crossings. And although the existing property is 33 plus acres, we know that there's only 26 buildable acres. So the number that this is derived from, we've had an appraised value of $5 million. We take that 70% of that, and we're generating at the current mill rate $87,000 a year in annual tax, on a tax basis from that. Next slide. And then you get at the personal property. Everybody loves personal property, which is within the structure itself. Shelving, equipment, whatever inventory is on hand, have you. Tenant improvements when they're done. Again, on an average, using the Clinton Crossing for an example, and what they generate from on an annual basis, that's a big number. You wouldn't realize $215,000 a year generating personal property tax from the crossing. That takes in at 79 cents a square foot. Again, we go back to our 100,000 square foot number. You've generated $79,184 in tax revenue on that alone. Okay? Here we go again. Next slide. Okay, so we go back to, I think we go one more, please, sir. I want to go to this. Bob ran it out over a period of time, starting in 2018, and with no change in mill rate, with a low of $305,000, a conservative estimate in tax revenue. In 30 years, this will generate $9,171,000 in tax revenue to the town of Clinton. Sale of this property in the future development. That's again a low estimate on the building. And if you take the high end of it, a little bit bigger building, County is a little better, assessments are higher. Potentially, you could generate up to $25 million in tax revenue over a 30-year period. Now, Kevin talked about a 20-year bond. There's probably going to be debate between 20 years and 30 years at some point along the line. There will be. Don't shake your head. But regardless of that, on an annual basis, on a conservative side, that's $305,000. When you take in everything that we just talked about, the three numbers we just talked about, you're up into the $430,000 annual, $530,000 annual range on revenues from that property. So with the sale of the property and the annual revenue derived from that property in future development, what it will do is, and this is a stretch we've talked about it many times, here's a scenario. School gets approved, the school is built. The town turns the school over, the Board of Ed turns that property over to the town. The town markets the property. We sold the property for, again, a little number, $5 million. That's what we have it appraised at now. That money goes into the general fund. At some point after that, the Board of Selectmen and Board of Finance can choose to go to special town meeting, take that $5 million, and have that appropriated to the capital fund, correct? Mr. Kane, Finance Director, which at that point, putting it into the capital fund can reduce the amount of money, probably within the last bond you have to issue for that building, of which you would have to borrow. There's an offset. Now, after that, on an annual basis, using the round number of $500,000 in tax revenue, that increases our revenues on our grand list by 500. That's the revenue. Okay, that's when we figure out what our tax levy is. That's $500,000 in additional revenue on an annual basis. Right now, $1.5 million in increased spending is a mill increase on your tax rate. Okay, so you're going to knock a third off of that on an annual basis, just with the revenue from the property on an annual basis. Right? I hope it's more. It potentially could be more. But we have an advantage. Guilford just passed an $80+ million school project, building that school on the existing site. Waterford is building a school on the existing site. We were just up there this weekend for a basketball tournament. They're not getting any offset to the money they're investing in that building other than what the state's reimbursing them. We have the potential for a huge offset. And again, as Selectman Giannotti, who's also a member of the building committee, said at our meeting a couple weeks ago, this is the most valuable piece of commercial property in the town of Clinton, and probably in the area because of where it is in proximity to the highway and the potential for future development because what's around it. So this is something you need to consider when you go to the polls. Okay, thank you.
Before we take questions, first of all, let me thank all of you for coming out here tonight to let us share our solution for this building. It means a lot to us. We put a lot of hours into it, and there's some great people on this committee. But I thank you for your time, and I hope you tell your friends and family about the future presentations that we have. We should always make sure we tell them the other day before we leave. I'm in a rock band, so you always say the next gig when you're. Anyway, let me finish this presentation by saying that the prospect of relocating and building a new facility for the Morgan School presents an exceptionally rare opportunity for the town of Clinton. Without question, the decision before our town will be talked about for decades to come, and lying before us is the opportunity to overhaul the educational environment of our flagship school, and we'll be able to do it without educational interruption and offset the project's cost with the sale and revenue generated from a property adjacent to Shoreline's premier shopping destination. 5 years after the American Civil War, Charles Morgan, with a gift to our town, established and endowed the school, ultimately bearing his name. Not only was it a gift of hope and opportunity, it was a statement of what he thought to be perhaps the greatest asset he could give his hometown, a proper home to educate his youth. Here we are close to 150 years later, and circumstances over the past 60 years have required the town to add pieces to our secondary school to serve our needs. The result is a sprawling conglomerate of these 60 years of circumstance fused together into an incoherent design. Today, we are left with a hallway-heavy maze of classrooms. It has 26 separate roof lines, never meant for longevity in a New England climate. It contains many expensive renovating pitfalls, and if we were to assume all these risks and pay to eliminate them, we would still be left with merely a renovated version of the same inefficient design. The building's California design, which was popular in the 50s, was conceived and built in an era which didn't require the consideration of energy costs in New England, never mind a $5 a gallon environment. Ultimately, the building committee's argument for renovation hinged on one single dimension, that it might be cheaper. The town study has shown that even that isn't true if you consider a reasonable sale price for this property that we're sitting on. At worst, we would cut ourselves off from any additional long-term tax revenue to ease the cost. In sinking more money into this structure, quite simply, we risk spending more, maintaining more, and getting less. Our town has one of the most storied educational traditions in the country. Our grade 4-5 school, Abraham Pearson, is named after the first rector and instructor of the very first classes of Yale, held right here at the Congregational Church Parsonage on our main street in 1701. Fittingly, Yale and Morgan share the colors of that church, blue and white. The conceptual design process, approved 10-1 by attendees at a town meeting last March, is meant to give us a cost estimate of the type of structure we need to overcome the shortcomings of our current building. Many Clinton residents have participated in community input events, and what was shared was included in our cost estimate with efficiency and reason. The price is for a building designed for us. It is a coherent design with little wasted space, superior functionality to the current building, a warm, rich learning environment, and designed to bring cohesiveness to the Morgan community. While the number of classrooms, labs, instructional spaces, and core elements to educate our students for the 21st century were given the first consideration, the feedback from the town revealed two program items that for us are cultural necessities. The first, the town of Clinton has heavy participation in sports, and the Morgan School has a rich tradition of success and championships. Included in this cost is a 2-gym layout, but in addition to what we have now, a new building would free us from our current fixed cinder block wall design. The new location will also save us money, as many teams will no longer require busing to the Peters Complex for practices, and the chosen property has significantly more field space. The second cultural necessity is the great value we place on and pride we take in our music, choral, and theater programs. This cost estimate includes a full-size auditorium with the proscenium stage opening to which we are all accustomed, and, as noted earlier, the addition of an adequate space for set construction. A new building will provide us with greater functionality in both these highly valued spaces. We should all be proud of the unique qualities, history, and traditions of the Morgan School. And the Morgan School deserves a building that reflects its school and town traditions. So after 2.5 years of study, the building committee has overwhelmingly recommended that we give the town a solution that is less expensive and yields the greatest results. Relocating and building a new Morgan is not only the most cost-effective solution, but may prove to be one of the proudest moments in Morgan School history. I hope each of you considers the historic magnitude of this opportunity for Clinton and the tremendous benefits of this project for the town. Thank you all for coming tonight. And now
the question I have is just related to cost estimate. You're asking us to vote on this. I heard one person say it's the budget, and another person say it's the upside number. All right, I think it's still a budget, right?
You're talking about the cost estimate that we have for the new school right now.
Budget estimate.
Okay.
What's the accuracy of a budget estimate?
I'm going to have Bob Lynn, who's our construction manager, answer that question for you. Okay?
Plus or minus?
There's not plus or minus. The estimate is what we consider to be the cost of the building. As I mentioned, there's escalation factors and contingency factors in there. As Kevin mentioned, we hope to spend less than that, but certainly not more. So that's the number you're going to be asked to vote on for the referendum. The state requires that the local school district approve the budget. So this number would become the budget before the state would then approve the project.
Okay, second question. Phase 1 was done on the property, proposed property.
That's correct. Yes.
It was used as a nursery.
Yep.
There is reason to believe it warrants greater attention than just to say it's an open field. It's been an open field. It would be an open field when we look at it in more detail. The nursery, I'm not against pesticides. I'm just saying is from a cost perspective, you need to know what the property has.
Absolutely.
Okay. I'm going to ask our architect who knows a little bit about that and explain to him how it was explained to us where we're at with the environmental testing.
So happens to us that, of course, the audience here tonight is residents. The town retains services of ECS, which is an environmental consulting firm in Brantford, excuse me. And to do the so-called phase 1 analysis, you might be familiar with this, but benefit of others, there's a phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3. Phase 1 is based on historical use of the property and available records that talk about the probability of there being issues. And there was more detailed follow-up on that. But that's always what is done at this phase of the process. It's looking at the historical use of it, obviously as a nursery. That question, the very question you're raising was investigated. And nothing at this point in time suggests that there isn't anything that we can't deal with in the normal mitigation manner. There's follow-up to that, should it be approved at referendum, then you go into the phase 2 where they do actual on-site testing and other kinds of things. But Matt, are you here? Do you want to comment on that further? I sure could. So, don't do what I did, which is like carry on for an hour.
No, you don't like carry on.
With a specific question,
My friend over here?
the estimate is based on phase 1 having been performed.
Sure.
I have no problem with that for typical property. All right, if you're converting from residential to something else, if you're taking a piece of property and making it a shopping center, you're now taking a nursery property of which did have regular use of pesticides. All right, the question ultimately becomes a financial risk to us, is if there are undesirable materials on the property, what's the cost of mitigation once we have engaged to build a new school? All right. I just think it's more prudent to have done more investigation at limited cost to get a heads up. I'm not saying a phase 3. I'm just saying is to have some level, whether you want to call it a phase 2, where you're doing limited test pits, right? Or limited water samples.
Sure, any and all of those things.
Okay, that gives you a flavor of a limited sampling says, yes, there isn't a problem, or yeah, we're running into some things that we did not encounter. That firms up the cost numbers that we're dealing with here.
David wants to talk a little bit about that too, and answer part of
Just a
it.
side note, Bob mentioned contingency. We have also built a contingency into site costs in the event we find contaminated material for trucking that off-site. At this point, we do not expect to find anything significantly contaminated. You may rest assured that we will follow the steps accordingly, looking at proper evaluation throughout. But in the event we do, we have also built that into the budget to be able to remove it.
How would you have quantified that for an estimate, sir?
Well, it's a difficult thing to be exact with because we don't know the particulars, but we evaluated X percentage of yards. Bob, do you remember the specifics?
Yeah, we can't quantify it because, remember what I said about it being a concept, we haven't done an investigation yet. But there is the cost of doing the phase 2 survey in here, and there is some money for addressing issues that happen.
Right, and we're relying on professional judgment of our consultant who looks at the likelihood of this occurring and recommends the number to our estimator to say, yes, we've looked at the uses, we see that there are some issues here, you should carry X number of dollars for that, and it's carried in there.
There's some interesting opportunities with the development of a property like this. There's certain things that you would expect to have been used on the property site-wide, and then there's other areas where things are stored. So there's different levels of what you might expect. And through the development and just through a simple soil management plan, the majority of this stuff could be handled very easily within the scope of all the stuff that is currently planned. And as Bob and Gerry said, any things that didn't need to be trucked off and remediated.
So what is being represented to
Could be
us
quantified
is
in
not a
ways.
significant cost impact or cost risk to us.
That is what I'm telling you tonight, based on the information and research that's been done to date and my own experience as a licensed environmental professional.
Have you redeveloped nursery property?
I've been involved in quite a few nursery projects.
So I guess the answer to the question
By the way, yeah, and this comes from someone whose 8-year-old son, daughter will be at this too, so.
The Hammock subdivision, I might jump in, the Hammock subdivision was built on our Clinton Nursery's property, same type of views, same things were done over there. When it was brought to the zoning board, which I was on, the town was on at the same time, same thing was done. They did a phase 1, they did a phase 2. They found nothing of concern that had to be remediated on that site.
We have a question up front. I think right now,
Can you repeat the question?
she asked, would further testing be done before we purchase the site or after we purchase the site? And Bob Lynn, before. Yes, sir.
My name is Bob Ruggiero. I'm a resident for 37 years here. I have some questions as the presentation was made, and some are just something I noticed and maybe just to bring a point I'll bring about. One is looking at the property that we have right now and what we're presenting here. Incidentally, I'm very impressed with the school. I'm very happy with it. I'm very for it. But it looks like we lose a practice baseball field, tennis courts, practice baseball and football field at the existing facility here, and we don't have it over there, other than the fact that we're moving closer to a facility with a baseball field and courts over there.
Okay, so you're
just an observation I'm looking at from the property.
Yep, so the question is, do we lose fields moving to the
Well, I
new
don't know
site?
if there's a need for the existing fields that we have right now, like when we moved over to the new facility.
Right.
You know, it's,
Well, let me, I'm going to ask Nate Jacobson, our assistant principal, because I think he was the one that worked with the architect.
There's a fundamental misunderstanding. There is not. In the new site, we're providing 6 tennis courts, a lacrosse, baseball, softball, lacrosse, soccer. Everything that exists on the Morgan School site was going to be at the new site across the river.
well, I didn't see it exactly there. I saw a facility, you know, I saw the.
Catch me after the meeting, I'll show you on the site.
Okay, well, these are just, you know.
But really, I just want to make that clear. There is a net gain here. If you have one soccer lacrosse field on this site, okay, the net gain is one additional soccer lacrosse field by year.
Well, these are just questions I'm coming up. I'm just going to give my random. How is the power being delivered to this building? Is it underground? Is it to the center? I mean, my background is electrical engineering, and I question myself how you're providing power to this facility and how it's being distributed. I know you talked about solar power in addition to this thing, but is there something being universally accommodating here at one particular area of this building where we normally take in power now and then switch over to solar where it's universal to a central location? Is there a power room down in the basement? Is it outside? Is it underground? Is it above the ground? I didn't see anything here.
So, part of our design team was Nathan Jacobson Associates, who were civil engineers. So the cost estimate that Gilbane has produced had the input of them investigating all the site utilities, including electric. Included in this number is and I don't have the number at my fingertips, is bringing the proper electrical service from the public way onto the site. Portions of it that are not on the site are not reimbursable by the state. That's already allowed for in the. Just the portion of it that's beyond the property line, but that dollar figure has been estimated. It's in the Gilbane estimate. So bringing power in a conventional manner is included in this estimate. We make no assumptions about solar diminishing that need. You should know that there's no expectation that solar will really ever replace the power.
Is anybody looking into, government funding, additional government funding if that should happen?
As I say, that was a project that Gilbane and our office worked together on in Wayden. A large one was 50% was funded by the Connecticut Clean Energy Fund. If those funds are available, people will be here to buy.
Okay, here's another question. It's all unrelated. the demolition of this whole area, is that cost included in what we're, if somebody were to do this demolition of this whole area, is that cost included in there, or is it just the people who are going to buy this building take care of the demolition?
That's exactly correct. That's what we're anticipating.
Hey, these are just questions.
It's marketing
at random, because these are something that runs through my mind when I think about when making a presentation. I know everybody's talking about condensing everything here, and I look for the future of the school. And I wonder, with a structure like this here, if we did have to expand it, how would you add on to this thing? I mean, we talked about a conglomeration what we have right now. If we were to add, say, another part of this building, what would we do? Like, I have an interest.
Let me interrupt and say that there, and I'm happy to point this out in a little more detail afterwards, but there's room here to expand up for an additional 250 students.
Well, say I wanted we had a proposal for a setting a swimming pool. We're not going to put that on the top roof. I mean, Killingworth has a nice facility up there with swimming, and that's bringing on another sport, for the town here. But where would you put a swimming pool? Out in the backyard?
Well, if the day comes when you all are anxious to build a swimming pool, and that says you're in good times. There'll be some resources available, and we'll find a way. I guarantee you.
I'm gonna let somebody else have an opportunity to ask a question right now, okay? And then we'll come back to you at the end.
Okay, I asked for it.
Okay.
Steve Bristol, 90 Longdale Road, Special David Ross. All your comparisons between new and renovate as new were between 135,000 square foot, and it seemed like the full size of the existing 158,000 square foot. Why would we not renovate as new at the 135? And if so, wouldn't that make all the comparisons at best deceitful? Plus, we also have an existing, fairly new gym and auditorium, so I mean there'd be money saved there. I'm just wondering why all the comparisons are being made between the 158 and 135 instead of comparing apples to apples. One kind of apple to another kind of apple.
Well, again, I guess I was emphasizing the fact that we're able to take 10,000 square feet out of the proposed building relative to the new building without impacting any educational space at all. It's just an efficiency, right? So it's true that one can take the present 158,000 square feet devoted to educational space at Morgan and say, yeah, let's demolish 20,000 square feet plus in order to get it down to this comparable level. You're going to be taking away significant, more than 10 classrooms to do so. You're going to be left with a very poorly insulated building with acres of flat roof, very inefficient in 100 different ways from an energy performance point of view, a poor plan in terms of supporting the educational program. In our judgment, they're not apples to apples at all. You could get the square footage to look the same, but the functioning of the building, the operating costs of the building, the maintenance demands of the building, even an equal square footage are vastly greater than this existing system.
But why would you renovate the full 158?
Why would you renovate?
Yeah, why would you if you're just adding huge amounts of cost?
Sure. Jump off the wall, which one?
158 square feet, or just everything in Morgan School right now that requires renovation?
The number that I said earlier, one of the numbers that we looked at was renovate as new, which the town would be able to receive state reimbursement for if you do a job like that. And that would be everything.
You wouldn't be renovating the auditorium. You renovate it as new.
Renovate as new means that you replace anything that doesn't have a useful life of at least 20 years. So that would mean probably redoing all the electrical system, most of the plumbing systems, most of the heating systems. We could replace the furnace about 5 or 6 years ago. So that would probably stay in the renovate as new scenario. But everything else in the school would be replaced so that it has a useful life of at least 20 years. That cost, that was a revised cost estimate that was just done, came to $60 million. The town share would be $41 million if you wanted to do that with this school. Again, it really doesn't make sense when you're looking at a town share of $45 million for a brand new school in a brand new location. The scenario, which Mr. Bristol, I think, right?
Yes.
Was asking about was renovating this to 135,000 square feet. $49,000, and the cost of $49 million. So we'll do that. Town share after state reimbursement would be $30 million. So there would be a $15 million difference between brand new and a new location and renovating this down to 235,000 square feet. Now, what that doesn't take into consideration is on a new site, you can sell this site for, we're anticipating $5 million in gaming tax revenue.
If you could sell it.
In our opinion, it doesn't make that financially a viable situation. What David was explaining was educationally, trying to get this down to 135,000 square feet doesn't make sense for education spaces. Yes, sir.
Plus, the design of this building is in the 1960s, 1950s. The energy consumption of this building, even if you renovated it with new equipment, new mechanical systems, nowhere near what a building like that would be. You have a passive solar system basically built into that. You have opportunity for geothermal heat pumps in the back. Wells to be put in by the river, like they did in Old Wine School. That was involved with design team on that. And there's a lot of opportunities here for very efficient type of design that's going to save in the future.
Yes, sir.
I have two questions. The first is, are we entirely assured of getting reimbursement from the state?
I think what we've been told by both David and Bob Lynn is this: the state has never reneged on their state reimbursement. And right now, that's what we're being told is our state reimbursement rate is 36%. And that's why we have to, if we do get approval, get paperwork into the state by June 30th. That's the deadline we're really. So.
The second question has to do with property taxes. I wasn't real thrilled to get a bill this year that was roughly 8% higher than the previous year. And if I'm hearing this correctly, for this project alone, we're going to be asked to pay another 8% on top of that, starting in some future year.
2014/15 is when we'll see the first impact to the bonding that we'll have to do. And a rough estimate, what Kevin said, is around 8%. It could be lower. There's a possibility.
So if you combine this year's or last year's increase with that, that's roughly 16%. I didn't hear a whole lot of talk here about offsetting cost cuts aside from the possible revenue to be gained by demolishing and selling this building. Which to me leaves the question if we have a higher tax rate than towns in this area. I'm wondering if, to follow up on this gentleman's question about the swimming pool, to talk about frills, did any committee take a look at other state-of-the-art school projects in this state and elsewhere to make sure that we were adding enough bells and whistles for a community desirability factor to justify the increase in taxes? This seems pretty conservative to me.
Let me just jump in. There's probably lots of ways to answer that question, but probably most significantly, when you're a 600-student high school, that's a very low enrollment relative to, again, a lot of the surrounding communities. But you have an auditorium in the proposed design that's twice what would normally be reimbursed by the state, and you have effectively 2 gyms. So those are more than bells and whistles. That's fundamental educational space, which is being almost doubled relative to what would be typically expected for a 600-student school. I think that alone puts Morgan in a place that's quite unique in that world. Technology-wise and all the rest, that all sort of comes through the development of design. We're not at that point quite yet. The whole swimming pool question has never come up in any discussions with the school staff. We didn't hear anybody speak about it as a priority.
Kirk Carr at 9 Osprey Commons South. I'm very glad you're having this meeting. I think you're having it the wrong time. I think this meeting should have been held before the Board of Finance or Board of Selectmen met. You've just filibustered for almost 2 hours before you've given anybody a chance to answer. Well, but I have a question. But the thing is I think that you haven't given us very much time for questions. We're already losing audience, and I think it's purposeful. I mean, I think you don't want to answer questions. But the other thing is that you've been suppressing information. We've had to go to an FOI to get information. Now, at the meeting that you had with the selectmen, David Townsend said that there was $1 million a year in capital expenditures on the building. I heard you cite some figures earlier. I've been asking Kevin Kane for documentation on this, and he says he can't give it or won't give it. He says somebody's done it today, has finally pulled something together. Are you willing to give us a documentation that could support this claim that there's, and tell me how much is it? Is it $1 million? Is it $250,000? What's the number?
Well, my statement at the beginning, in my opening statement, was that over the last 25 years, we've spent $10 million on capital improvements to the Morgan School.
Okay, so that's about a half. So that's a $500,000.
I also said that in the future, over the next 20 years, we can anticipate spending many millions of dollars more.
So what does that come out to a year that you spent?
400,000.
And so you said $1 million, so it's not $1 million. We can put that figure away. Is that correct, David?
Do you have a
Yes, sir. I think
yes, I mean that's the question.
I believe it falls somewhere between $500,000 and $750,000. Finding the collective data is difficult. There are a great deal of factors involved, but certainly I think you're safe at $500,000, no question about that.
I mean, the most that the CTA could find was about $183,000 looking at construction, and I've given Kevin Kane that information, but if you can document it, I would like to see your documentation on that.
We'll get that.
The other thing is that I'd like to know what else is left out. I know you don't have in bonding charges, you don't have $130,000 that you had initially in the pre-referendum. There are a lot of things that you've had. There's a maintenance building that we're going to have to build sooner or later. I don't know how you're planning on accounting for those costs, but there are a lot of costs attached to this building that you're not sharing with the people in this community. And on March 21st, the Clinton Taxpayers Association will have a meeting to shed a light on all of this, and I hope all of you have a chance to come. It'll be at the town hall. Right now it's going to be in the Rose Room. If we can switch with conservation, we'll have it in the green room. But you're going to find that the total cost of this building, plus the cost of government in this town, is going to raise your taxes 26%. And we can show you why that is. And if you're worried about 16%, you can really be worried about 26%. So I hope you'll come on the 21st.
Could I ask a question, please? I was wondering about security in the school, because I know when you gave your presentation downtown, we had another public information session, and you talked about the security, and I think that people are interested in how the students will be protected afterwards something should happen. So could you just talk about the security and the number of openings that we have here and the doors?
Right, so you mean security in the sense of access to the building as opposed to...
Yeah, I mean security and safety of the children and the staff.
Right.
And whoever else happens to be.
I guess again, I might put that in the category of things in a specific sense as part of the development. It's not at the stage where we are. The specific security measures that are going to be instituted for on the perimeter of the building. I guess fundamentally, at this stage, what there is to talk about is that it's a very limited, very compact building. There aren't a lot of recesses and ins and outs and internalized courtyards that can be places where bad things can happen. There are a limited number of exterior entrances easily monitored around the perimeter of the building. So I guess the simple answer at this point is just to say that the diagram is one that supports good control of entrances and excludes the possibility of there being lots of hidden places where, again,
Mr. Walter.
Thank you. Been up for half an hour. I want to congratulate all you people on the work you've done. We live in a technology age, and I want to get some food for thought. Are we a little early in this project? I was watching a piece on television the other night, and will we be teaching the same way in 10 years from now as we're teaching today? In this program, each child had a television in front of them. And the teacher was in front. She had a monitoring television to see what each child was doing. Now, if you had a system like that, you could have the teacher and she could have 30 people in the room instead of 20 people that you're building the classrooms for now. So I don't know what we should look into this. I saw it on there, and there was a professor of learning, and he thought this project was one of the best things he ever saw. And it may be something we should look into before we start going into building this thing and see what we got down the road, you know. We didn't realize here a few years ago what we'd be using in technology, you know. So, is this what we want or not?
I just want to answer that a little bit quickly with a...
All right, I just want to
it's good to think about that. So if this does get approved, there's a full phase that takes effect in about a year where we go over exactly what we want in each classroom. And that suggestion might be something that our administrators bring up and say, hey, we need bigger classrooms, we don't need as many classrooms. As David explained earlier, this is conceptual and design. If this gets approved, we hire an architect and we start over. And those are some
I wanted to bring it up because I thought the program was very, very good, and it was good. It's, you know, in technology, we don't really know what's going on. It's coming so fast that everything may change. Within 10 years, everything's going to be altogether different than it is now.
I think 10 years ago. That's correct. And to that end, there is more than $1.4 million in this estimate for technology and related equipment.
You know, well, that's, yeah, but also you have to figure out the size of a room when you're looking at a room for 20 or you're looking at a room for 30. I mean, it's going to make a whole different conception. So I just thought I'd throw it up.
It's a good point, sir.
Hi, Dundon. Two quick questions. One, how many years do you predict before this building is sold? And would this building require some minimum amount of maintenance, or would be cold and dark until we, you know, sell it?
Well, we're hoping that if this is passed at referendum, that the new school would be open in 2015, not the beginning of the school year, but the middle of the school year 2015, I think is what we're looking for. So probably in between Christmas break, we could move kids from this school into the new school. So that's what we're thinking of as far as a time frame for completing the new school. So this particular facility will be in use until 2015, hopefully not after 2015.
But you still have some costs for this building unless you make this.
You don't turn the heat off once we leave the building. That's correct. The town will keep this building open and heated. I would hope and I would anticipate that some committee would be formed to market the building once we know that we're going to move forward with a new school project. You know, I don't know why this particular property couldn't be sold prior to that, or an agreement could be reached with someone prior to us moving out of this building.
And the last question is, who's financially responsible if there's any abatement issues here? Would it be the new owner or us?
Well, the way we anticipate it is we would sell the property as is. The town would sell the property as is, and whoever bought the property would be responsible if they wanted to demolish the building for abating it or demolishing it the way they should. Another question?
A couple of things. The first, I have many problems with the new school, quite honestly. For one thing, we don't know for a fact that we're going to be able to sell this property. That's number one. And number two, who we sell it to and what they'll put in. So we can't really know what kind of tax monies are going to come back from that. So we're doing something on perspective rather than knowledge of what's going to happen. And with the economy like it is, quite honestly, I'm rather doubtful that we're going to be able to sell the property for $5 million, no matter how well positioned it is in the community. But
okay,
that aside, one more thing, and then you can address that point if you would. And that's with a new school. I have it written down, so I'll get back to you. With a new school, I'm pro-education, as everybody that knows me. But I don't see any educational advantage to a new school. I don't see where it's helping our students. And that's more important to me than anything else that we've been talking about. There's no advantage to those students being taught. And if that's the case, then a new school to me is absolutely irrelevant. We don't need it. We need to fix what we have rather than move on to a new school. That's my biggest thing. I want the kids to be educated. I want our education system here to be the best in the state. A new school isn't going to do that. And there's nothing here in any of the literature that I've ever read that says our educational system is going to be better. So
let me try and answer the first question.
Okay.
As far as the real estate that we're sitting on right now, we have had an appraisal done of the property about a year ago, and it was appraised at $5 million, $5.5 million. We have had people that know commercial realtors check with the commercial realtors, and that is a valid estimate of what this property would sell for. And in their estimation, it would sell. It is a valuable piece of property. But you're right, we don't know for sure until we actually pass this referendum and then go to try and market this property. But it's my personal opinion that the traffic flow that goes by here to the existing mall, I think it would be a desirable piece of property. Again, that's
I'm just worried about the economy. I mean, let's face it, the economy sucks right now, and it may be 5 years from now it won't, but we don't know that. And that's my point.
To answer your next question, I'm going to have our superintendent talk to that. Okay.
As Mr. Walter indicated, the changing dynamics of education warrant a design that is conducive to students working together collaboratively with teachers, teachers working together in different ways. This facility is not conducive to the design work, the programmatic design work that we have done over the last 4 years. Our complete look at education through the eyes of high school of the 21st century laid out a roadmap for the kind of teaching and learning that needs to take place. All of those concepts were fed to our architects and design folks, and they've come up with a facility that does build a structural element to collaboration that we're looking to be able to move forward with and be able to outfit those facilities with the level of flexibility and technology that Mr. Walter may appreciate as well. We don't have all of the knowledge of what it's going to look like 5 years, 10 years, 20 years from now, but we know that a facility of this nature gives us greater flexibility to adapt to that than a facility that we already have. And I would argue that the emphasis on education is what drove this in the first place, not just to have a new facility.
There's nothing in any literature that mentions any of that, though, is my point, Jack.
Tim, the point is that all of that work has been done and has been laid out. All you have to do is go to our website and you can see all of the information about the educational components that have led into this particular site.
I'm happy to talk more if you'd like to.
Yes, sir.
Dave Johnson. I went to school here when they were doing the renovations on this roof. And you don't want kids here when they're doing work. Because you're walking down the hall, there's buckets on the floor, buckets in the classroom, the roof's leaking. It's probably the worst thing for education. Because they're not going to get it done in the summer. It's going to go way longer than that to renovate this place. And it'll just happen again.
The roof, okay, which is sort of driving this whole study, was due to be replaced in the summer of 2011. And the reason for that is the state will reimburse the town part of the cost once the roof reaches 20 years old. So that was the 20-year number. Now, prior to this, we've had leak issues with the roof, and the maintenance department has money in their budget to repair the leaks that have occurred. And usually it occurs during the winter months when the roof expands and contracts. We've asked and come up with a ballpark figure of around $8,000 a year, I think. Is that correct, Jack? Per year is usually what we budget for roof repairs. And that's what we've been doing over the last several years. And we'll continue to do that if this passes at referendum for the next 2 years.
So you wouldn't spend $4 million?
No.
You just do maintenance and patchwork?
Correct. When a leak occurs, we will fix
those slides that Mr. King and Mr. Fritz used be available, because I can't run my calculator fast enough to sit here and talk loud.
We have a website that we will have those slides
Yeah,
put up
I'll
on.
make sure they're available, and at the same time, if you want to call or email me or stop in, feel free to.
I'm wondering what, if this fails at referendum, and frankly, I hope it doesn't, what's plan B?
Everybody in the committee. I was thinking of how I would answer this question, and we'd have to sit down as a committee. Quite honestly, we haven't talked as a committee about what we would do. I mean, if it's a really, really close vote and it fails, I think we ask our architect and our field aid construction guy, is there anything that we can cut from this cost? Maybe it failed because the price was too high. And do we come back to the voters with a lower price option? If it gets killed, then, I mean, I think what the townspeople are saying is they want us to replace the roof on the existing building. And once you do that, I think you're married to this building for the next 15 to 20 years. I mean, are you going to put a $4 million roof on this building and then build a new school in 5 or 10 years?
Is that how the question is going to be phrased? Either build a new school or start repairing the roof? Or is it going to, no, I don't mean that sarcastically, I mean actually what will the question say?
Yes or no? Do you want to spend $64 million on a new school, yes or no? And I think that's what you're asking me, is what if it's a no vote? I mean, I think once you put a new roof on this building, you kind of saying that you're going to live with this building for the next 20 years. And then you look at renovating parts or all of them. I mean, I don't think you should renovate all this building. It just doesn't make sense financially to do it. But I think you're going to spend millions of dollars over the next 15, 20 years fixing things in this building. You took the tour, and I'm sure you can identify certain parts of this building that are in dire need of renovation. Yes?
Didn't you say that if you replace the roof that you have to bring everything up to code?
No.
So you don't,
No, I didn't say that.
You did.
No, one of the options that we looked at was renovating as new. And that would be renovating the whole building.
Okay.
It costs too much, basically, to do that.
Okay, but you can just replace the roof? The
Well-
state lets you just replace the roof?
Oh, yes.
And leave
Yes.
everything else as it is? Okay, I didn't know that.
Would we need to consider widening the road in front of the proposed entrance and or putting in 3 stoplights?
I'm sorry, repeat the question.
Well, what we have out there is a wider road with the stoplight at each entrance and exit. Would that be something we'd have to consider?
Well,
It's a
there's
very
there's
busy
a whole
road.
variety of things one might consider in terms of site improvements here, but in terms of how one funds that. Let me just
No,
touch.
I think he's talking about the new
Oh,
site.
I'm sorry, the traffic control. So now repeat the question, so I understand what you're talking about. the new
Well, what
site.
we have out here is a wider road, sort of bottlenecks as you go up.
Right.
It's a single lane, but we have
Got it.
left-hand turn lanes. You have a light here and a light here, and you have 3, significant entrances and exits. I mean, do you need a stoplight, 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 and then do you need a wider road?
I'm sorry, I understand your question, right. So as the design process proceeds, we would engage a traffic engineer. The traffic engineer studies all those things. Locations of intersections as they relate to other intersections that already exist there, the potential for backups to block other intersections, the presence of stop signs versus traffic lights, and all of that would be the subject of a professional investigation. So the 3 entrances we show right now, very diagrammatic.
And that's 0 reimbursed, right?
Pardon me?
That would be 0 reimbursement rate on any of those improvements?
Anything that occurs outside of the property line is not reimbursed by the state, correct? But again, there are some allowances in our bid, in our estimate, some of them contingency items to deal with those kinds of things. But I just do want to I'll be really quick, just clarify this point about reimbursement. So you can do little things in this building, and the state will reimburse you when you make improvements to the building, like an educational improvement. They will not reimburse you a penny for anything that they consider maintenance, right? So if doors are rotting, if the paint is bad, if the floor is coming up, if the roofs in the leak have caused interior damage, those are not reimbursable from the state unless you do the so-called renovate as new project. So you can do lots of incremental things at almost any price tag you want. And the part of it that results in an educational benefit to the students get reimbursed. Anything the state considers to be maintenance of nature with the exception of roof replacement, and they will also pay for code compliance. They will not pay for that. In exchange for paying for a lot of maintenance work, you have to agree that's the 100% code compliance and meet every aspect of the code and 20-year useful life. So a so-called renovate as new project inherently has a big price tag. You can't, there's no such thing as a $5 million renovate as new.
I just have a quick question. If you could just highlight on the MSC the recent report of 2010 and what effect that would have for the future accreditation of Morgan?
The accreditation, do you want to?
Just your recent MSC report and what the recommendations and what they might have told you that you need to fix or improve, and what that could do if it's not done to the accreditation of Morgan.
Well, the series of recommendations that fall under the teaching and learning component, I think, are driving forces that helped us really work with David in terms of design and the functionality. Technology was a very big component of the NIASC report, and the access to technology as far as teachers and working with students. And obviously, with the design, that is something that we were very conscientious about in having that ability for students to have access to it. In other areas too, in terms of the NIASC report, there were points made related to safety and that making the building safe and secure for students was a big concern that came out of the report. Related to other facility issues, obviously they did address the roof. They did address some code compliances that we definitely need to adhere to. And in the course of time, I and the rest of the faculty need to report in a 2-year report. So that's next year. And then we have a 5-year report. And then we go through the accreditation process again. So every 10 years, the accreditation process takes place. But there are interim reports that we need to provide in order for our accreditation to still remain in good standing. So they are looking for us, which we are currently in good standing, but again, they're looking for us to make those changes, and so I need to report back on that.
You promised to keep it to a question.
I promise. First of all, I'd like to get the answer to the question that I had about the bonding. You know, what the bonding costs are going to be. Well, it is one. The question is all the extras. If you add up all the extras, not the $64 million, but the widening the road, the bonding cost that's not in there. If you add all that together, how much is it?
Okay.
The stuff that the town's going to have to pay for above and beyond this. What is that?
There are no other amounts. The only thing that was left out of this estimate, okay, was something you mentioned was a maintenance building for the maintenance department.
I think the bonding costs are out too.
The costs are out, but Kevin has given us an estimate, as Bob has, of $100,000 to $200,000 for bonding costs, and those should be handled by contingency. If you remember earlier in the presentation, we have nearly $8 million in contingency. So the bonding cost should be handled by contingency.
So those were initially $950,000, and now they're only $100,000 or $200,000. Was that just a mistake?
The initial.
Okay, basically, the goal here is to do 2, maybe 3 bond issues. Each bond issue, in essence, will be $100,000 and change. So when we do 2 bond issues, it's going to be $200,000 to $300,000. 3 bond issue more. If you look at the contingency budget, my understanding it's $7 or $8 million. That's going to cover the finance costs. It's more than enough.
Okay, you want to address the maintenance building then, and maybe the widening of the road.
I'm sorry?
You want to address the maintenance building and maybe the widening of the road. What are all those extras that are going to hit this town?
I think the widening of the road question was answered.
Well, how much is it? How much do you think it'll be?
We won't know until the engineering studies are done, and we have monies in the cost estimate to cover those contingencies. The maintenance building was left out because quite frankly, it's a lot less expensive for the town to build a maintenance building outside the scope of this project. And initially, it was part of the design or on the property itself and was estimated at between $1.2 and $1.4 million. And we, as a committee, thought that was too much to spend on a maintenance building. We also have to determine, one of the things that has to be looked at is where the maintenance building is going to be located. There may be an opportunity to put it in an existing town building where we wouldn't incur any cost at all. But again, that was removed because we thought it was too much money to spend on a maintenance building, and it would be a lot less money for the town to build outside the scope of the building project. And it is not reimbursable by the state of Connecticut.
And in terms of demolishing the buildings that are on the current site, or moving the 1800, the building that was built in 1800, are those costs in here at all?
We don't know what we're going to do with that property, and I can't really talk about anything in regard to that property because negotiations are still ongoing.
But I mean, are you going to demolish? If you demolish it, do you have that in your budget?
We haven't discussed what we're going to do.
So those are some more costs, right?
Constantly. If there's a leak, we fix it. As far as if this gets voted down and we have to replace the whole roof, or we decide to replace the whole roof, That's probably a project that would take place next summer. It takes that long to hire an architect, get the plans out, get the project out.
I have the plans right now.
The roof is actually in pretty good shape for a 20-year-old. We had professionals go up there about 2 years ago. Jack was up on the roof himself. He's not a professional that was looking at it.
I had somebody else.
It's the professional educator that was looking at it.
Gotcha.
It's in pretty good shape. It's a roof that's 20 years. So we can't wait much longer. So, yes, sir.
I thought there was some form of stipulation, if we sold this property in so many years, we had to get so much back to the state.
Yep. When we first started looking at the possibility of moving to a different site and selling this site, that's the information that we have received. Subsequent to that, we checked with, I forget her name, but she's in charge of the state bureau that goes over that stuff, and Bob Lynn has checked for us. Farm. And she has assured us that any proceeds that the town receives from the sale of this property would not go against any state reimbursement we would receive. So the monies would be received free and clear. The state would have no claim.
Yeah, I know, I mean,
that's what we're being told.
It would be a good selling point if we knew whatever money we made would either pay off the debt of the school. I think that would make a lot of people more reassured.
I agree. I actually had this discussion with a business manager too. It's like, I want to pay off the bonds, but he said, no, that's not the way it works. It's not the way it's set up. It goes into the general fund. And then the Board of Finance will-
If you do a bond issue, let's say it's a 20-year issue, usually it's not callable after the first 10 years. So it's not time, you can't time it that way anyway. Basically, what you're going to do here, when we do a bond issue, let's say we do one bond issue, a large one up front, there's always a back-end bond issue. And my suggestion is, we'll still plan a bond issue, we'll do the bond issue, but if this property sells, when we think it's going to sell, and we need the cash, maybe we do a short-term finance, it's called a band, and then you can take this lump of money and pay off the project. But, I don't know, I'm very conservative and pessimistic. Right now, we don't have a buyer out there, so I don't want to tell the public, yes, we're going to do that until it happens.
Well, if there's a case, it does come to Plan B, I think you'd sway a lot of people. If they knew that if we sell this place, it's going to go paying off the school, because there's a lot of people worried about the tax increase. And that may swing some people.
I agree.
Old Saybrook, in 2005, was authorized to renovate 117,000 square foot school for $12 million. Why is it going to cost us so much more to renovate our school than Old Saybrook's for only a little bit more of the square footage?
I have no idea what Old Saybrook is, but the prices that we have for renovation were provided to us by the bank. They're the leading school builder and renovator in the state of Connecticut, and I trust them to give us accurate numbers.
What year was that, sir?
2005.
Mr. Keith.
I have a couple of concerns. Number one, this is a hot topic. There was 100 people in this room tonight. 100. 25 people went on the tour. Only 25. This is about a building. I don't want any more money going into this building, a building that was leaking in 1980. How much money has been spent on it since then? Tim, it was leaking when you were here. All right, then we're talking to it. Last year at meetings, we just had to try to say something about Old Saybrook. We're being compared to Old Saybrook. We're being compared to Guilford. A year ago, or a couple of years ago, Guilford renovated. They got money from the state, renovated, tore down their building mill. This is about a building for me. I don't want to put any more money into this place. I don't want to downsize it so it fits into 150,000 feet so we can sit here and have the same old buildings. It's a building. The education is going to get better. If you have an issue with the education, I would advise going to the Board of Ed, and let's talk about that in a different discussion. This is about a building. That's all it is about.
You have a question?
No, I don't. Back here, my wife's out there probably saying, don't say anything.
We're going to do this again on the 25th. It's a Sunday at 2 o'clock. So, anybody else wants to sit through it, they can.